Scream, A Quiet Place, It Follows, and Jaws are considered to have some of the best openings in horror. However, some filmmakers go in the opposite direction, kicking things off with a sequence that has little resemblance to the overall plot. Of course, starting things off unconventionally isn't always a good sign. Yes, it's refreshing to avoid a formulaic approach, but these jarring introductions left many people wondering if they put on the wrong film by accident. So let's take a look at them. I'm Adam, this is What Culture Horror, and here are 10 opening horror scenes nothing like the rest of the movie. Number 10. Uzumaki. Uzumaki follows Toshio Saito, a father who is cursed, causing him to develop an obsession with spirals. Toshio's behavior seems odd at first, but it isn't long before his hobby consumes him and leads to his demise. And when the hex spreads to the rest of the town, Toshio's son and friends worry they'll suffer the same fate. Now, despite having some nightmarish imagery, there isn't the slightest indication Uzumaki is a horror for the first 10 minutes or so. The film opens with a schoolgirl, Kyrie, frolicking through her village while uplifting music plays in the background. Her jaunt is interrupted by a boy who begs her to go on a date with him. This scene is filled with weird close-ups, and the camera inexplicably flipping sideways or upside down, which makes this little exchange come across as playful and whimsical. Even though the source material has moments of levity, this scene feels like it's setting up for a light-hearted romantic tale. As such, it's a proper WTF moment when things go full-blown body horror, with the townsfolk contorting themselves into spiral shapes, breaking every bone in their bodies. Number 9. Twilight Zone, the movie. The Twilight Zone has remained among the most innovative TV series in history, even after 60 years. Despite that, Rod Serling's horror sci-fi saga is pretty dated by today's standards, so when it was decided to adapt 4 Twilight Zone episodes into a feature-length movie, the filmmakers knew they had to amp up the scares. Although Twilight Zone the movie received mixed reviews, it has plenty of disturbing scenarios, effective jump scares, sinister creatures, and haunting shots that are responsible for many sleepless nights. What makes these scenarios so disturbing is how the prologue feels more in line with the original show's campy nature. The opening is also extremely meta, with 2 unnamed characters, played by Dan Aykroyd and Albert Brooks, discussing the Twilight Zone. Aykroyd's character asks if his friend wants to see something scary before transforming into a monster and killing him. Based on this goofy intro, it looks like the adaptation will embrace the sillier aspects of the classic series, but considering the first segment deals with lynching, the Ku Klux Klan, the Vietnam War, and concentration camps, it's obvious early on that Twilight Zone the movie is going to be genuinely unsettling. Number 8. The Exorcist. William Friedkin's The Exorcist gave birth to some of the most petrifying moments in cinema, including the 360-degree head spin, the demon-faced jump scare, and of course the exorcism itself. Due to the abundance of spine-tingling shots, it's easy to forget about The Exorcist's opening, especially since it's the only scene that doesn't revolve around Reagan. Instead, the scene in question focuses on Father Merrin, who's excavating a dig in Iraq. After discovering a Babylonian talisman of a demon, Merrin becomes deeply worried and marches off. As he wanders across the archaeological site, he sees an ominous statue of the same demon leering at him, amplifying his concerns exponentially. Although this scene is unnerving, it's very different from everything else that's to come. The Exorcist is filled with sequences that are crass, vulgar, gross, shocking, and violent. However, this opening scene takes a subtle approach, implying this talisman has awakened an almighty evil upon the world, which Merrin is fully aware of. The scares here aren't as in-your-face as later scenes, but the statue's ominous appearance alerts Father Merrin and the audience that they will soon bear witness to something truly horrifying. Number 7. Van Helsing. After the success of Stephen Sommers' The Mummy, the action horror director got to work on another potential monster franchise with 2004's Van Helsing. The titular slayer facing off against Mr. Hyde, Frankenstein's monster, the Wolfman, and Dracula. To the disappointment of many, this gothic thriller was let down by cheesy dialogue, cheap visuals, and tasteless action. Worse still, Van Helsing seemed like it was going to be amazing, beginning with Victor Frankenstein bringing his creature to life on the orders of his master, Dracula. After the Transylvanian Count murders the good doctor, a mob chases the creature to a windmill before incinerating it, seemingly killing the bolt-necked brute. Not only does this opening contain the fast-paced action we'd come to expect from Summers, it captured the soul of the Universal monster movies thanks to the monochromatic aesthetic, use of miniatures, and the over-the-top performances. Though Dracula's true form and full power is only implied, enough is revealed about the Prince of Darkness to highlight the immense threat he poses. It honestly feels like the director put all of his best ideas in this scene, since the next 120 minutes is a total slog by comparison. Number 6. The Ritual. In British folk horror The Ritual, Luke and his friends get caught in a storm while in a Swedish forest, forcing them to seek shelter in a creepy cabin. When Luke's mates become catatonic and begin chanting in tongues, he believes their presence has awakened some dark force. After stumbling upon wooden effigies and hearing distorted roars in the distance, Luke realizes the group is in far more danger than he could have ever imagined. Although The Ritual is an underappreciated gem, the first scene paints a very different picture of what we're about to see, starting 6 months prior with the gang having a laugh at the pub. When Luke and his mate Rob head to a local store, they get caught up in a robbery. Luke manages to hide in time, but Rob is left out in the open, catching the attention of the thieves. Despite Rob's best efforts to de-escalate the situation, the robbers batter him to death. The scene catches everyone off guard since nobody's expecting the kills to start until our core characters enter the woods. Even though The Ritual primarily deals with a supernatural antagonist, this scene highlights a danger that's grounded in reality, which is arguably more frightening. And while I've got you here guys, I want to hear from you. What was the horror movie that you watched where you thought the opening was great, but then you were like, wow, that really had nothing to do with the rest of the movie? Make sure you let us know down in the comments, and while you're there, give us a like and a subscribe. Alright, now back to the list. Number 5. Night of the Creeps. In Night of the Creeps, college student Chris accidentally unleashes a cryonic zombie on a fraternity, leading to chaos across the neighborhood. This 1986 picture may embrace familiar genre tropes, but it's anything but formulaic. Firstly, these aren't run-of-the-mill zombies, as shooting the creeps causes parasites within to burst out, infecting anyone nearby. As a result, the heroes must find an alternative method to defeat the creeps, since it's dangerous to attack them head-on. Even though this undead flick is an absolute delight, how it starts is really weird. The first shot involves a silly-looking extraterrestrial sprinting around his spacecraft. After stealing a mysterious canister, the alien runs away from his laser-blasting comrades, hurling the capsule into space. Somehow things become stranger, with the scene transitioning to a sorority row in 1959 with everything depicted in black and white. While on a date, a guy's girlfriend is abruptly murdered by an axe-wielding psychopath in what seems like two scenes slapped together from two random movies. When the boyfriend finds the canister, a slug from within jumps into his mouth, turning him into a creep. As entertaining as Night of the Creeps is, this setup is unnecessarily long-winded, and the story probably would have been better off without it. Number 4. Evil Dead Rise. Lee Cronin's Evil Dead Rise revolves around two estranged sisters, Beth and Ellie, who are hoping to reconnect. But when an earthquake hits their building, this little reunion is put on the back burner. And just to add to their problems, the quake unearths a demonic book which unleashes a horde of body-possessing deadites on the sisters' family. Though the legendary Sam Raimi wasn't involved in any hands-on fashion, Evil Dead Rise captures the original film's tone, while still feeling fresh and new. But based on how things start, the devilish body horror looked like it was sticking closer to that first movie, beginning in familiar fashion, as a young girl is hanging out in a cabin in the woods with her friends and her sick cousin Jessica. However, Jess quickly proves she's not ill, but more she's possessed, as highlighted by her lobbing off her friend's head and scalping the other. Even though this scene revolves around the same malevolent force that Beth and Ellie encounter later on, it has no direct connection to the plot. Nevertheless, it's a great scene, with some impressive scares and a flawless title reveal. Number 3. The Happening. M. Night Shyamalan has had his fair share of duds, nobody's gonna deny that, but nothing has been on par with The Happening. At almost any given point, this 2008 film teeters between a disaster of a disaster movie or one of the greatest unintentional comedies ever made. But based on the first few minutes, The Happening seemed like it was going to be a hit. The picture begins with two women sitting on a bench in Central Park, where one of the ladies notices everyone nearby has stopped moving. With little warning, the woman's friend pulls out her hair clip and drives it into her neck. As horrific as this moment is, it's not an isolated incident. Nearby, a construction foreman is joking with his buddies when he sees a co-worker plummeting off the roof, leaving him fatally wounded. While the foreman reports the incident, he notices another worker fall to his death, then another. As he gazes up, he's horrified to see multiple employees voluntarily leaping off the building, committing an unexplained mass suicide. Though Shyamalan's work is infamous for its bland performances, the actors here do a superb job of eliciting abject terror in the face of an unknown danger. Too bad the happening goes downhill immediately after. Number 2. Prometheus. When Ridley Scott agreed to helm another Alien installment, it seemed at the time like a return to form for the cosmic saga. Rather than churning out another xenomorph-centered story, Scott's Alien prequel, Prometheus, explores the origins behind the acid-blooded parasites. For that reason, the preamble to Alien was expected to be a little unconventional. However, Prometheus proved to be more head-scratching than anything else. With that said, nothing caused more bewilderment than the first 5 minutes. The disjointed prequel starts with an alien, but not the one we're expecting. This humanoid creature, known as the Engineer, stands atop a waterfall, gazing upwards at a UFO in the sky. After discarding his robes, the Engineer performs a strange ritual which involves him drinking black goo that causes him to decay on a cellular level. As his crumbling body splashes into the water below, his DNA fuses back together, which means something. The fact that we don't know where or when this scenario takes place compounds the confusion significantly. Prometheus has many perplexing moments, but nothing on par with seeing the Engineer for the first time. And number 1, the Empty Man. Saying the Empty Man's onset feels out of place doesn't do it justice. Instead, this 20-minute sequence feels almost like a self-contained story since it focuses on separate characters in a different time period and environment. This mind-bending horror begins with Paul and his 3 friends traveling across a Bhutanese mountain. When Paul falls through a crevasse, his friend Greg heads down to help him out. To Greg's astonishment, Paul has been left in a catatonic state, staring in awe at a giant humanoid skeleton. One by one, each of the group becomes possessed, causing them to kill each other or themselves until Paul is left alone. After that, the rest of the story centers around James, a widowed ex-cop who's researching a mysterious cult, believing they'll lead him to a missing girl. Though the intro eventually ties into the bigger picture, it doesn't happen for almost 2 hours. Considering the Empty Man is 140 minutes, it could have realistically functioned without the opening. Nevertheless, it was the right move to keep it in, since it's the most tense and enthralling sequence in the entire film by far.